I want you to remember that God's created everything you see. He breathed it into existence. You remember when his people were caught up in slavery? He rescued them. What he did was he parted the sea and he made a way for them, and then he delivered their enemies to them, and he unlocks wombs, and he provides water from a rock, and he provides manna from heaven, and he brought down the walls of Jericho. He froze the sun, allowing victory. He's toppled giants with tiny stones. He's brought fire from heaven. He's shut the mouths of lions. He preserved life in the belly of a well. He's fed thousands with a few loaves. He gives the weak strength. He heals the sick. He's made the blind see, the deaf hear, the mute speak, the lame walk, and he's overcome evil, and he's made a way through death for you and me by the death and the resurrection of his son, Jesus Christ, that we will live with him forever. We will dwell in the house of the Lord forever and ever and ever and ever. What are we afraid of? His resume is flawless. He controls everything. And he loves you.
What are we afraid of? Hi everyone. We've been talking for the past couple weeks about fear and about not becoming so much fearless, but learning to fear less. Fear is something we all face at times, especially in times of uncertainty. Fear creeps up often when we face problems and circumstances that we don't know how to handle. With 4 kids, I've learned some VeggieTales songs along the way. One that I've often sung at bedtime when someone was struggling with being afraid is a song that says, "God is bigger than the boogeyman. He's bigger than Godzilla or the monsters on TV. God is bigger than the boogeyman, and he's watching out for you and me." Now that may be a kid's song, but there is some truth in it for us as adults as well. God is bigger than our fears. A few weeks ago, I was reading my Bible when I came upon the story of Caleb and Joshua. The story is found in the book of Numbers, and is a story that I believe brings home that simple truth. God is bigger than whatever we fear. To give you some background, after escaping Egypt, the Israelites have been wandering the desert and have finally come to the land that God had promised them. Before entering, Moses sends 12 men to go and explore the land for 40 days. In Numbers chapter 13, verses 17 to 20, we see Moses giving these 12 explorers a list of things to find out about the land that they have been promised by God. Moses wants to know what the land is like, if there are a lot of people living there, and if they are weak or strong. He wants to know if the cities are fortified and if the ground is fertile. And lastly, he asks them to bring back some samples of the fruit growing there. The 12 men set out, and after 40 days exploring, they returned with some fruit and a report of what they found. Numbers chapter 13, verses 27 to 28 says this: "They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there." The men agree. The land is bountiful. It is flowing with milk and honey. But there is much to be afraid of. The people are powerful. The cities are fortified and large, and even the descendants of Anak are there. The descendants of Anak had a reputation. They were known to be strong and tall. And Deuteronomy 9:2 implies that no one could stand up to them. For it asks the question, who can stand up against the Anakites? There was much to be afraid of. In fact, the idea of taking over such a land seemed impossible, and their report seems to back them up. Fear threatens their hearts and causes them to doubt the promise of God, which was to give them that land. Now, Caleb sees things differently. He doesn't fear what he saw. Numbers chapter 13 and verse 30 says, "Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, 'We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it.'" Out of all 12 spies, Caleb seems to stand alone in his feelings about their ability to take possession of the land. He tries to rekindle their faith and declares he is confident that they can do it. But the others immediately reject his idea. They are consumed with fear. There is just too much to be afraid of. Numbers chapter 13, verses 31 to 33 says this, "But the men who had gone up with him said, 'We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are.' And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, 'The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them.'" Their report has gone from bad to worse. In fact, Scripture uses those words, bad report, as an indication that the words they are speaking are not even true. Their description of the land has somehow become tainted. No longer are they merely facing fortified cities and huge people, but now it would seem that the land devours those living in it. Fear has a way of always making the situations we face seem bigger than they really are. Fear takes our circumstances and places in our minds the worst case scenario. This was the case here for these explorers of the Promised Land. The men explored the land, and fear told them that it would never be possible to take possession of the land, even though that is what God had promised them. And so, this bad report spread throughout the whole community. And Numbers 14 tells us that all night the people of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. Fear creates chaos. Sometimes around us when we face fearful situations as a community, and sometimes just chaos within us. We battle feelings of despair, hopelessness, anxiety, and stress. Fear has a way of taking our eyes away from the things we are certain about, like the promises of God, and instead places them on the what ifs. What if things don't get better? What if I can't get through this? What if I can't make ends meet? What if I can't beat this illness? What if they die? What if I'm left all alone? What if? What if? What if? Fear of the unknown gripped the hearts of the Israelites so tightly that the whole community starts to break down. And any thoughts of God's promise to bring them into the promised land disappear. Chaos erupts, And they even talk about abandoning God's plan altogether and choosing a new leader to take them back to Egypt, back to a life of slavery. Now that seems ridiculous to us. Really? The Israelites would choose to go back to a life of slavery? But I think it shows us how powerful fear really is. Fear makes us do things that we would never imagine doing. We may not return to a life of slavery in Egypt, but fear can definitely cause us to abandon God's plan for our lives and instead choose what we are comfortable with, what we know. Fear can control us so much that it can take our eyes from what God is doing and instead cause us to wonder if He is even there. So how do we fear less? When life is in chaos, when the problems are too big to face, when we don't have any of the answers, how can we possibly fear less? I think some of the answers to those questions can be found in this story of the 12 explorers of the Promised Land. The community is in chaos. Fear has driven them to abandon God's way and choose instead the path back to Egypt. Moses and Aaron, the leaders of the community, are in complete shock at what is taking place. And in utter disbelief, and maybe even a little fear of what God would do about the rebellion of His people, they fall face down before the Israelites. And everything seems to be spiraling out of control. When Joshua and Caleb, 2 of the 12 explorers, step up, they tear their clothes in a display of grief and distress over this refusal by the people to enter the Promised Land. And then they say this in Numbers chapter 14, verses 7 to 9. The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, He will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will swallow them up. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Caleb and Joshua do not dispute that there are obstacles to overcome in taking over the Promised Land. But something is entirely different in their view of the situation. There may be giants in the land, but their protection is gone. The Israelites, however, have the Lord on their side. Therefore, the balance of power is changed. Those living in the Promised Land may appear to have the upper hand, but it is really the Israelites who have the power to overcome the enemy. In the end, the issue is not about the human strength of the Israelite army versus the Canaanites. The question is not who is taller or who has larger walls around their city. It is not even about who has more weapons. In the end, all of that does not matter. What does matter is where they place their trust. God is with the Israelites. God can be trusted to make good on His promise, to bring the Israelites into the Promised Land. Out of the 12 men who explored the Promised Land, 10 of them could see only problems. But Caleb and Joshua saw only the promised power of God. They knew He had promised to bring them into the land prepared for them, and they had faith that He would do it. Someone once said, when fear knocks on your door, send faith to answer. That was the response of Caleb and Joshua. Faced with the impossible, they relied on the promises of God. They knew He had brought them this far, and He would see them through. They knew that He had already declared that He would bring His people into that land flowing with milk and honey. And so when fear came knocking, they answered with faith in God. We may not be staring down giants in the promised land, but our fears can create in us the same response as it did in the Israelite community. We can be terrified of the future. We can want to turn away from where God is leading us because it's scary and there are a lot of unknowns. Maybe fear is rising up and creating chaos around or within you right now. Whatever fears you face today, know that it is possible to fear less. It is possible to walk into the unknown with a peace instead of chaos. It is possible by remembering God's promises to you, by remembering His faithfulness in the past, and trusting and believing in faith that He is not about to leave you now. Does that mean your journey will become easy? I'm afraid not. If you read the rest of the story in the book of Numbers, you'll see that because of their faithless attitude towards God's promise that the whole generation of Israelites would die before entering the promised land. Because of their faith, Caleb and Joshua would get to enter, but it would be years and years down the road before seeing God's promise become a reality. You may be facing things, situations, circumstances today that seem just as impossible as taking over the promised land. If that is where you find yourself, remember, God will lead you in His way. Do not be afraid because He is with you. His promises are sure, and His faithfulness never runs out. Put your faith in Him today. May God bless you.